To photograph someone is to reduce them to a two-dimensional object, freezing them in time and flattening them in space. Filming someone allows them to move through time, however limited they may be, but it still flattens them. Look at me. I'm flat on your screen. I will be forever. This is in part because cameras are monocular and not binocular. They only have one eye, so they can't see in three dimensions. This isn't to say that they cannot perceive depth, just not three-dimensional depth. The camera transforms an actor's three-dimensional body into a series of lines and curves on a screen. 3D films do exist, however, I'm more focused on Argento's Golden Age films of the 70s and the 80s, and his only 3D film was made in 2012, and I think it's supposed to be really bad. More specifically, I want to explore how perception creates violence in his films and how corpses are treated as centerpieces to his murders. One of the most overt instances of perception is from the scene in Suspiria. Before Pat is gruesomely murdered, you saw her body on the last slide, she sees this pair of inhuman eyes peering in through her window. These eyes represent Argento's camera, which is aware of its role as a disembodied spectator throughout his films. In his death scene, the camera stalks Daniel as he makes his way across a courtyard. It's perched upon a building and it hides behind a colonnade. The distance leads us to assume the threat will come from afar. Wings flap and a shot of gargoyles implies that they might come to life, so we are kind of shocked when he is killed by his seeing eye dog. I think it's very important to note that Daniel was betrayed by his only connection to the visual world. The inciting events of Deep Red include the murder of a psychic, Helga Ullman. At a conference, she detects and is overwhelmed by the twisted, perverted thoughts of the murderer who is in the audience. She perceives violence and is disgusted by it. A little bit later in the film, our protagonist Marcus Daly sees the face of the murderer, but cannot recall it, writing it off as a painting in the moment. Again, he is betrayed by his eyes. However, in this film, he manages to reconcile the relationship and remember what he saw, and that saves his life. As a Giallo protagonist, Daly feels particularly voyeuristic. As he witnesses the murder through a window, he's a foreigner, a British piano teacher in Rome, and is at an arm's length from the entire drama until he is, to my own point, forced into the situation when his two-dimensional picture enters the newspaper and he's identified as a witness. He, on multiple levels, is an outsider looking in. He is drawn into the violence that is drawn to him. Violence is both repulsive and attractive. I should mention here that Deep Red has some of the most elaborate and artistic death scenes of Argento's Golden Age films. If you're out of the loop, gialli, or yellow, named for the color of the covers of Italian pulp novels, are melodramatic murder mysteries. They often remind me of gory soap operas, and I think that's due in part to their Hitchcockian influence. Argento's gialli have especially strong Hitchcock genes, especially from his more violent films. Murder plots and intrigue fuel the worlds of both of the director's films, and maternal figures have significant power. The mothers in films such as Blackmail, Strangers on a Train, and Psycho are overbearing, whereas younger, maternalistic characters such as Vertigo's Midge are appreciated but ultimately scorned. Argento's mothers are distinct but similar. Suspiria and Phenomena both feature maternalistic institutions which hide and support the film's main antagonist, who are also maternal figures. In Deep Red, the culprit is a character's mother. Sisterly figures, such as Sarah or Sophie, are killed off. Suspiria, Inferno, and the much later The Third Mother are all part of Argento's The Three Mothers trilogy, which is about three witches who use their magic to manipulate the world and is inspired by a segment from Thomas de Quincey's account of his opioid dreams. I could go on, but I kind of want to talk about Carlo Manganiello, another character from Deep Red. He's the guy who kind of looks like Bob Dylan. To use Robin Wood's vocabulary, he's the sort of Hitchcockian, falsely accused man. Though he isn't the main character, nor is he that falsely accused. His mother may have committed all of the murders, but he still attacks Marcus and Daria Nicolodi's Gianna Brezzi. Another story structure that would identify as the guilty woman story, which also fits Deep Red. Psycho leads us to believe that the Bates family has a similar relationship. Norma kills women, Norman has to clean it up, but is ultimately free from blame, I guess. Hitchcock is less explicit about the film's mythology, so to speak, but both mothers have traumatized their sons in some way, and both sons have, or have had, a repressed obsession with their mothers. Both directors have this fascination with maternal control. But that's not the only thing that they have in common. As I mentioned earlier, the violence of perception is literal in Argento's films, and it shows up in Hitchcock's films as well. Psycho and Vertigo are of particular interest here. Both Marion and Judy are objectified by the men and the cameras in their respective films. In Vertigo, Judy is shaped and groomed by the men in her life into a different woman. She plays a role in their own plots or psychodramas. She is merely an actor. Scotty acts as the camera that gazes. On one level, Judy is directed by Scotty. On another, Kim Novak is directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Neither see the real woman, just the character that she plays. The perception and objectification in Psycho is, with one pretty big exception, more passive or voyeuristic. When we are introduced to Marion, she is mostly naked. There's also the much discussed scene where Norman spies on Marion as she changes. I want to note here that Norman peers at Marion with one eye. Again, he acts as the camera that gazes. The hole that he uses to watch her is behind a painting, and so too does she become a two-dimensional object. And then he murders her, finally and literally turning her body into an object. Psycho and Vertigo have this eye or ocular motif, which is present in Argento's films as well, another occurrence of the violence of perception made physical. A drain shot near the beginning of Deep Red that pans up to an eye shaped stain feels like an obvious nod. The first thing we see of our murderer is her eye. Martha Manganiello was an actress, and now she stalks and murders people. The perceived becomes the perceiver, and, like with most giallos, the murders are shot from her point of view. The eye motif is present in Suspiria as well. Sarah's reanimated body has needles through her eyes. There's an Eye of Providence in Mother Marcos's chamber, and the witch's lair is hidden behind three irises. This scene is particularly interesting to me. Sarah flees Susie's room because she thinks there's something in Susie's wardrobe, and then we see the door begin to open. The camera takes the point of view of someone walking out of it. Sarah runs through the school, pursued by something. We're not certain what it is, but it doesn't feel like it's this entity that comes out of the wardrobe. Um, but right before she's attacked, we see this. We never learn who is doing the killing in Suspiria, only that the witches are behind it. But the way that they're presented implies that the witches don't like to get their hands dirty. It can't be Pavlos. Look at those nails. The man who kills Pat appears inhuman, created or summoned or compelled by the witches to do murder. He remains unseen but sees everything. He is the camera made human, and he commits the violence of perception. The bodies in Suspiria are mutilated, sometimes beyond recognition. Mother Marcos's magic makes her invisible, therefore rejecting objectification. Only when she is killed can she be seen. Even she, with all of her power, becomes an object. According to Jessica Harper, Mother Marcos's actress, Leila Swasta, was a 90-year-old ex-hooker Daria had found on the streets of Rome. We know nothing about her other than her two-dimensional appearance on the screen, barely moving.